I'm a 31-year-old female, and this happened when I was 29, back in 2020. My friend, let's call her Stacy, told me that she had a friend, Brienne, who needed a dog sitter because Brienne and her husband were going on vacation to California. Stacy knew I dog sat on an app called Rover, which is an app where you house sit, walk dogs, and do other pet-related tasks. I thought it was the perfect opportunity since I was in need of some cash. $200 to dog sit for 5 days? Why not, right? Brienne showed me around her house a week before I dog sat and introduced me to her huge husky named Bear. I'm not gonna lie, it was a big husky, a little overweight too, but still adorable. Brienne told me I was welcome to help myself to whatever food I wanted, and the front door had a lock with a number code, so the house was pretty secure. A week rolled around, and I showed up later on a Friday night, not long after Brienne and her husband left for California. Things were pretty chill for the first 2 days. I was at work for most of the afternoon, went to feed the dog on my break, and came back later at night. I would take Bear for rides in my car, stay up late watching movies, and let Bear sleep by me when it was time for bed. Anyway, after work on Monday night, I heard a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole, and it was a guy who looked like he was wearing a black police uniform. I thought it was a bit odd, but opened the door to see what was up. "Hello? I'm looking for a George," he said. "George?" I thought. "Oh no, there's no George here. I'm dog sitting for a friend. I've been here since Friday." Looking back, it was pretty stupid to tell a random person at the door that I was alone. "Oh, okay. How long are you here?" he asked.
"Till Wednesday," I responded.
"Oh, that's cool. Okay, sorry to bother you," he said, and then he left. I was slightly weirded out and locked the door. I texted Brienne about what had just happened, and she pretty much just said, "Oh, don't worry about it," and shrugged it off. I thought that was weird too. Things were normal again until I went to bed on Wednesday at midnight. As I was lying in bed, the thought kept coming to my mind that I should make sure the front door was locked. So I got up and checked it. Luckily it was, but I still had a weird vibe. I fell asleep and then woke up at 3:05 a.m. to the dog barking like crazy. It freaked me out a little. I thought someone had broken in. I got up and went to the living room where I saw Bear growling and barking at the front door. I looked through the peephole and saw the same guy, this time with another man, both standing there in security guard uniforms. At this point, I was creeped out. Why would the same guy come back when he knew I was alone? I didn't bother opening the door this time. 2 guys I didn't know, dressed like security guards at 3 a.m.? I made sure all the doors were locked. When I saw that they had walked off, I opened the door and didn't see any type of security car anywhere. I still have Bear to thank. I think his barking might have scared them off. I went back inside and fell asleep. I didn't bother telling Brienne because she was in California anyway. I'm glad to say I only stayed 1 more night after that. To this day, I still don't know who those guys were or what they wanted, and I haven't been back to dog sit since that incident. There's something about being alone in a house that makes you notice every little sound. When you're surrounded by people, those creaks and groans of an old house blend into the background, barely registering in your mind. But when it's just you, those sounds become louder, more insistent, like the house itself is trying to get your attention. That's what I was thinking about the night it happened. I was 16, and my parents were out for the evening, leaving me home alone in our house at the edge of the woods. It wasn't the first time I'd been left by myself, but there was something different about that night, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. I had my homework spread out on the kitchen table, but I wasn't really paying attention to it. The TV was on in the living room, casting a soft glow across the room, and I could hear the muffled sounds of a sitcom playing in the background. Outside, the sun had long since set, and the world beyond the windows was shrouded in darkness. Our house backed onto a dense forest, the trees pressing in close like silent sentinels. During the day, it was beautiful, a place where I could lose myself in nature, surrounded by the scent of pine and the rustle of leaves. But at night, those same trees took on a different character. They became a wall of blackness, a place where anything could be hiding just out of sight. I wasn't scared, not really. I was used to the woods, used to the way they seemed to close in around the house at night. But as I sat there, my pen tapping idly against my notebook, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started with a sound, a faint, distant noise that barely registered at first. I paused, my pen hovering over the paper, and listened. Nothing, just the usual creak of the house, the low hum of the refrigerator, the laugh track from the TV in the other room. I shrugged it off and went back to my homework. But a few minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was louder, more distinct. A voice, faint but unmistakable, and it was coming from the woods. I put down my pen, my heart skipping a beat as I strained to listen. The voice was distant, almost like a whisper carried on the wind, but I could hear the urgency in it, the way it seemed to reach out, begging for someone to listen. Help, please help. I frowned, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. It didn't sound like anything out of the ordinary, just someone in trouble. But the woods were dense, thick with underbrush and uneven terrain. It wasn't a place you'd wander into by accident, especially not at night. I stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the backyard. The moon was high, casting a pale light over the trees, but I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Just the same dark shapes of the forest, the same stillness that had always been there. But the voice didn't stop. Help! It was a woman's voice, soft and pleading, growing a little louder with each repetition. My first instinct was to run outside to see if someone needed help, but something held me back. There was something off about that voice, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was too faint, too distant, like it wasn't really coming from the woods at all, but from somewhere else entirely. Help! I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. I couldn't just ignore it. What if someone was really in trouble? But the more I listened, the more I felt that gnawing sense of unease, like something wasn't right. Finally, I made up my mind. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, my hand trembling slightly as I flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the backyard as I stepped outside. The night was cold, the air crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. The trees loomed overhead, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. But the voice had stopped. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting to hear it again. But the woods were silent. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the wind. I should have gone back inside. I should have locked the door and forgotten about it. But something compelled me to move forward, to take a few tentative steps toward the edge of the woods. Help! The voice was louder now, closer, like it was coming from just beyond the tree line. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I kept moving, my flashlight casting long shadows across the ground. Who's there? I called out, my voice trembling slightly. For a moment, there was no response. And then the voice came again, clear and sharp. Help me, please. It was so close now, so real that I almost believed it. Almost. But there was something wrong with the way the voice echoed through the trees. Something unnatural about the way it seemed to bounce off the trunks and come from every direction at once. I stopped, the beam of my flashlight trembling as I pointed it into the woods. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to go inside and lock the door. but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the voice stopped. I stood there, frozen in place, the flashlight casting a jittery beam of light across the trees. The silence was deafening, pressing in on me from all sides, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I was about to turn back, to retreat to the safety of the house, when I heard a new sound, rustling in the bushes just ahead. I pointed the flashlight toward the sound, the beam illuminating the darkness. For a moment, I saw nothing, just the same dark shapes of the trees, the same tangle of underbrush. But then, I caught a glimpse of movement, a figure standing just beyond the reach of the light, barely visible in the shadows. My heart lurched in my chest, and I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching me. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, so intense that I almost dropped the flashlight. My mind raced with possibilities. Who was it? What did they want? Why were they just standing there, hiding in the darkness? And then I realized something that made my blood run cold. The figure was standing where the voice had come from, but it hadn't moved. It had been there the whole time, which meant the voice hadn't been moving through the woods. It had been coming from that exact spot, as if the figure had been calling out to me. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure was barely more than a silhouette, but there was something wrong with the way it was standing, the way its body seemed to blend into the shadows, like it wasn't entirely there. I knew I had to get out of there. I knew I had to turn around and run back to the house, but my legs felt like lead. My feet rooted to the ground as I stared at the figure, unable to look away. And then, slowly, the figure began to move, stepped forward just enough to come into the light. My breath caught in my throat as I saw it clearly for the first time. It was a woman, or at least it had been at some point. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were dark, hollow pits. Her hair hung in matted strands around her face, and her clothes were tattered, clinging to her thin frame like rags. But it was her expression that terrified me the most. She was smiling, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched across her face, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too white. It was the kind of smile that didn't belong on a human face, the kind of smile that sent a jolt of pure terror through my entire body. And then, in a voice that was both familiar and completely alien, she spoke. "Help me." I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I just turned and ran, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand as I sprinted back toward the house, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear the rustling behind me, the sound of something moving through the bushes, but I didn't dare look back. I reached the back door, fumbling with the handle as I threw it open and practically hurled myself inside. I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands, and backed away, my eyes fixed on the darkness outside. For a moment, I stood there, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. The house was silent, the only sound the rapid thudding of my heart in my ears. But then I heard it again, the voice, right outside the door. "Help me, please." I backed away, my mind racing. This wasn't possible. I had just seen her in the woods, just heard her calling out from the trees. How could she be here, so close, so fast? I grabbed the phone from the counter, my fingers shaking as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was a lifeline, a connection to the real world that I clung to desperately. "There's someone outside my house," I stammered, my voice barely steady. "I don't know who it is, but they're trying to get in. Please send someone." The operator assured me that help was on the way, but it felt like an eternity as I waited, every second stretching out like hours. I could hear the voice, still calling out from just outside the door, but I refused to go near it, refused to look out the window. Help me. The words were like a broken record, repeating over and over, each one sending a fresh wave of terror through me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The voice stopped abruptly, and I felt a momentary sense of relief. But when I looked out the window, the backyard was empty. The police arrived minutes later, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched the area. I told them everything about the voice, the figure in the woods, the way she had appeared so suddenly, so impossibly close to the house. They searched the woods, combing through every inch of the area, but they didn't find anything. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. It was like she had never existed at all. The police stayed for a while, trying to reassure me, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They didn't believe me, not really. They thought I had imagined it, that I had let my mind play tricks on me. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. After they left, I locked every door and window in the house, my hands still trembling. The fear hadn't left me. It was still there, gnawing at the edges of my mind, making me jump at every little sound. I kept expecting to hear the voice again, to hear it calling out from the darkness. But the night was silent. In the days that followed, I tried to put the experience behind me. I told myself it was just a bad dream, a trick of the light, anything to make it seem less real. But deep down, I knew the truth. I knew that something had been in those woods that night, something that wasn't supposed to be there. And I knew that it had been calling out to me. I've moved away from that house, away from those woods, but the fear never truly left me. It's a part of me now. I know that whatever was out there in those woods is still waiting for someone else to hear its call. I was 16 at the time, and I lived with my single mom in an apartment. I was an only child, and my mom worked 2 jobs, so I was left home alone pretty often once I got old enough to take care of myself. I was never scared of being alone, mostly because I was in an apartment complex with a lot of other people living above and below me. On this day, my mom was working both jobs. When she got out of her first shift at 2, she went straight to her next shift, which started at 3 and ended at 11. It was summer, so I was out of school. I didn't have a car or anything, so all I could really do was walk around or stay home. I spent most of my morning watching TV and even took a short nap. At 6, I was getting hungry for dinner, but we didn't have much of anything for me to eat. So I took some cash off the counter and walked to the grocery store. It was a 40-minute walk, but at least the weather was nice. I got something small to snack on as well as a frozen meal and then started the walk back. It was already dark out, but the whole road home was well lit and not in a dangerous area, so I wasn't worried. I'd done this plenty of times before. Halfway back, though, I noticed that a man walking a distance behind me was taking all the same turns. I picked up the pace, but I never seemed to lose him. The final road led straight to the apartment complex, and there was nothing else down that way, but he still trailed behind me. I was nervous, but I told myself it was most likely just someone else who lived in one of the apartments. I got to the entrance and went up to my room. I knew everyone who lived in my complex, or at least what they looked like, so I figured that whoever that man was couldn't get inside if he was trying to follow me. I took my frozen meal out and started heating it up in the microwave. About a minute went by before I heard a buzz from the room below me, then from my room, and then the one above me. It was someone at the entrance door requesting to be buzzed in. This was something people would often do if they forgot their keys, ringing all the rooms in hopes that someone would be kind enough to let them in. I waited for a moment, then heard the faint sound of the entrance door unlocking and opening. Someone let them in. I walked around and put my ear against the door, listening carefully. I heard a knock at one of the rooms downstairs. Then someone answered. It was extremely difficult to hear any specific words, but at one point, I could have sworn I heard my name. My heart started racing. The door downstairs closed, and footsteps started coming up the stairs. They walked right up to my door and stopped. I backed away from the door and tried to be quiet. Then they knocked again. Hello? Your mom asked me to check up on you. Can you just answer the door and let me know you're all right? Please? Not to make this sound bad, but my mom would never randomly send someone to check up on me while she was so busy with work. This was definitely something bad. I moved to the opposite corner of the room and dialed 911. The man continued knocking and calling out for me as the police were on their way. At one point, he even started kicking the door as if trying to knock it down. I was terrified and locked myself in my room. Eventually, the knocking stopped. Officers showed up a few minutes later. The woman living in the room downstairs told the officers that the man said he was a babysitter and had asked her if she knew which room was mine. She said he knew my name and everything, so she didn't even think not to trust him. It's pretty clear, though, that he was probably trying to kidnap me. Unfortunately, they had no way of identifying the man aside from the woman's description, so he was never found. Still creeps me out, though, wondering how the man knew my name and that my mom wasn't home. How long had he been stalking me for? And is he still?